When it comes to the human story, one of the foremost mysteries modernity contends with is humanity's historical proclivity for pagan worship. Ra in Egypt, Zeus in Greece, Dagon in Philistia, and Marduk of Babylon, cultures throughout antiquity were generally possessed of a chief deity, accompanied by a varied assortment of lesser gods over all the forces in nature. The sun, moon, thunder, war, love, and fertility, the list goes on, with dozens of deities comprising all ancient pantheons. Whether in South America, Egypt, or Mesopotamia, extravagant temples were dedicated to all sorts of gods. Such practices and religious archetypes are prevalent throughout world history, cutting across time and space, across vast oceans and epochs. The modern man generally looks at these pagan religious practices as foolish, childish notions. We easily gloss over any attempt at reasoning out why the ancients went to such Herculean efforts in constructing megalithic temple complexes or erecting precision-cut statues of their idols. Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Karnak in Egypt, Chichen Itza in Mexico, vast wealth, energy, and resources were expended on these endeavors, yet we simply dismiss them as pure Neanderthalism. It's not just the zeal and expenditure in constructing these megalithic sites that boggles the mind, but also the similarities and echoes in time and across oceans. Architecture, iconography, religious practices, shamanistic psychedelic usage, the parallels in pyramidal structures, depictions in stone, and pagan pantheons are simply impossible to ignore. From a secular historical perspective, pagan practices of believing in many gods are truly baffling, and are simply chalked up to pure backwardness that would eventually give way to the enlightened modern man. And any analogous cultural pillars between disparate civilizations, which seemingly had no contact with one another, are dismissed as pure coincidence. The fact is, modernity and secularism hold no substantive explanation to account for such seeming strange beliefs or historical coincidences. And so we turn to the biblical tradition for answers. As it pertains to the Bible, God explicitly forbids the worship of any deities other than himself as one of the Ten Commandments. That is fascinating and leads to a simple question arising. Why would an all-powerful God need to instruct humanity not to worship other powers? If all that exists in the ether is just God himself, and humanity worshiping other gods is simply imagined child's play, why would God need to insert this as one of the Ten Commandments? It'd be akin to a child today imagining they have superpowers. Would an adult need to sit them down and sternly command them not to believe so? Of course not. It's simply a child's imagination. There must be more to the story. So let us delve into the Jewish mystic tradition for answers. The foundational text of Jewish mysticism, the Zohar, provides a historical starting point. Zohar in biblical Hebrew roughly translates to radiance, alluding to its revealing the hidden, radiant, heavenly wisdom woven into the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. In its commentary to Genesis, the Zohar relays the following. After Adam was expelled from the spiritual paradise of Eden, God dispatched an angel to teach him the wisdom he'd need to know for his new, non-paradisiacal existence. All the secrets of creation, the stars and constellations, and angels, all knowledge required to build out human civilization as we understand it was imparted to Adam as he embarked on the journey of founding civilization. City building, animal husbandry, agriculture, and irrigation, everything was taught to him. Additionally, as part of the spiritual governing system God brought into being, he created and appointed angels over all forces and nations in creation. The sea, stars, earth, and all the elements, God created angelic beings to oversee all elements of the world at his direction and oversight. Collectively, these angelic beings, called Elohim throughout the Old Testament, collectively form the divine assembly of heaven. Now, despite the existence of these angelic beings, tasked with overseeing their assigned forces, they are in no way independent of God, rather only existing as pure extensions of his will. And so, it was from the very beginning that man possessed knowledge of the divine assembly, and all the angelic beings God created to carry out his will in the universe. The renowned 12th century biblical commentator, Egyptian healer, and sage, Maimonides, relays the following in his section on the origins of idolatry. It was during the latter days of Adam's grandson through Seth, Enosh, that humanity began misusing their knowledge of the angels and heavenly host. For the first millennium, under the righteous influences of Adam and Seth, humanity had correctly understood that the angels were mere puppets of God and not to be looked upon as independent agents or even respected as intermediaries between the physical and spiritual. However, with the passing of Seth in the year 1042, or 2719 BCE, humanity began to worship all the angels who'd been appointed over the forces of creation. What began as simply respecting the angels as intermediaries and emissaries of the one God, over time devolved into seeing the angels as independent deities over their respective forces, with the one true God himself being forgotten to the winds of time. This civilizational trend continued until, many centuries later, the post-flood Tower of Babel civilization arose, centered in ancient Babylon in modern-day Iraq. Their civilization covered the greater Middle East, from ancient Kush to Asia Minor, all the way out to India. The capital of this greater unified culture was the city of Babylon, and all people spoke ancient Hebrew, the language of humanity since the time of Adam. This was not to last, however. Per Jewish historical tradition, their rebellion of God, as relayed in Genesis 11, resulted in a cataclysmic civil war due to the confusion of the tongues, as none could understand one another any longer. The wars that ensued resulted in the dispersion of humanity from one people, speaking one language, into a scattered race of seemingly disparate peoples and tongues. This hidden history is the crucial node which explains everything missing in the story of human history. Why most human societies throughout history have been polytheistic and pagan, and why we see such parallels across continents between civilizations and races of people that had no seeming contact with one another. The simple answer has been right there in the Bible, in Genesis, all along. All peoples originated from the same spawn point of the Middle East. As a result, it makes all the sense in the world why developments there, of humanity believing each angel was the deity over its assigned force, resulting in the cementing of polytheism as the belief system of all, would inform all later cultures. Since humanity was dispersed from one central cultural region to all corners of the earth, of course their architecture and belief systems would mirror each other. The Olmecs, Egyptians, Mesopotamians, Indians, and Orientals, they all built pyramidal, megalithic structures centered around a polytheistic pantheon of deities. They did so as those were the architectural and religious traditions they'd inherited from the Middle Eastern regions they'd all dispersed from. Further, we can now also answer why God forbade worship of other deities and why the ancients went to such efforts in constructing megalithic sites to honor their many gods. God indeed created many spiritual beings, which Judeo-Christians would later call angels. The mystical purpose of these beings is to carry out and oversee all the various aspects of creation at God's direction. The reason being that the infinite God would overwhelm his finite creations were he to directly manage them with his actual infinite essence. Hence, he created the intermediaries of the angelic host of heaven. Throughout the Old Testament, God is referred to as Elohim, which in Hebrew means Lord. In relation to God, that would be Lord with a capital L. However, many times throughout the Old Testament, the angels are also referred to as Elohim. In relation to the angels, though, they are lords with a lowercase l. The reason for this linguistic overlap is that God indeed appointed the angels as lowercase l lords over their assigned forces. This is what the second commandment means when God commands not to worship the other Elohim. The same word used again. It's referring to the angels, or the lowercase l lords. God warns against thinking the angels are independent entities who control their assigned forces, and thereby mistakenly come to worship any entity but him. Further, now it is understandable why the ancients went to such lengths in honoring the gods. These are indeed real beings which God created, and are not simply fictions of stupidity or Neanderthalism. Thus we see, the origin of paganism and biblical idolatry are one and the same. The shared history of humanity, up until the events of the dispersion in Genesis 11, mean that all peoples share a common ancestral heritage. This accounts for all shared similarities between cultures, across eras and oceans, cultures that no evidence point to ever intersecting with one another, yet share numerous architectural and religious commonalities.